Do you think motivated reasoning is a driver for the polarization in the country? Because we assume that the things that we already believe are true. Those pockets just continue to get deeper and deeper on both sides.
I'm getting so excited. The bias to easily want to reject new evidence that disagrees with our prior beliefs and accept new evidence that agrees with our prior beliefs.
At this point, it's a dopamine response game.
Right.
Like, it's not about sharing fact. And it worries me because are there any educated voters?
Give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now.
Patrick Monahan. Gosh, it's exciting. It's fun to be back behind the cameras with you.
It is.
I'm excited about this podcast. So it's a really good idea you had last time, and I thought we'd take advantage of the fact that in November we have a critical election coming up. From the perspective of your profession and your perspective on the world, I want to hear, today a good reminder to everybody listening that at the end of the day, we're still all on the same team. I think we lose touch with that fact. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how we want to get started on that, but maybe we start with just your thesis. Why conservatives and liberals need each other?
Sure. And, you mentioned my background, so maybe I'll just start a little bit, my unique blend. So I'm primarily an academic. I have a PhD in biostatistics, but also quantitative psychometrics. Psychometrics is the study of the reliability and validity of questionnaires using quantitative statistical methods. My undergrad was psychology. My entire career I'm a professor in biostatistics in a department of biostatistics and health data science at a large university. My entire career has focused on behavior research. So I consider myself actually first and foremost a behavior scientist, but also a biostatistician and psychometrician. And so in sort of brief regular terms, you could think of me as sort of a combination of a psychologist and a mathematician. Okay, so now to the point.
Yeah.
You and I have discussed this recently, and I'm so excited about it. I've started to write an outline of a book for it. But why it's so important that liberals and conservatives need each other stems largely, partly from just the overall thesis that it's great that we have a lot of people in the world and we have a lot of diversity. Mm-hmm. And by diversity, I mean it in the broadest sense, diversity of skills. Now, diversity of culture, which has been a focus a lot recently, is important. And cultures differ and they bring different ideas. But equally important is general diversity of skills, physical skills, mental skills, emotional skills, interest. You wouldn't want everyone interested in the same thing.
Yeah.
So with conservatives and liberals, I love that we have conservatives, liberals, and centrists. I love that they have different opinions. I love that they debate. As you said, we have such conflict right now. It's important to remind people that it's good that we have those different views. So let's get into some examples. I mean, first of all, before I even mention the ways that conservatives and liberals differ, which, by the way, is relatively minor compared to the ways that we're similar. So let's start with how we're similar. First, we're humans.
Yep.
And I can tell you're getting excited about this topic as I am. As you know, humans share certain behaviors and cognitive biases. This isn't putting the human down. The human is amazing. The human brain is amazing. But part of its amazingness is that it does do some shortcuts, some heuristic shortcuts to try to make things more efficient. It's a very efficient thing.
Is this how we get motivated reasoning?
Yes. So you you know about motivated reasoning.
I've had a little. You remember my first podcast with Dr. Henley, so we had a little bit of a conversation where I picked up and remembered some things, right? It went a little bit over my head, but some of it stuck.
You're going to make me think about so many things. I'm going to write down a few notes before I forget. So let's talk about motivated reasoning. That's one way that we're similar. Humans tend to have motivated reasoning, and people might define that slightly differently. The general idea means that we reason not just based on logic, but a lot on emotions. And especially if it's a topic that really taps in to either our ego or something we feel strongly about. As you can imagine, that taps into the
Do you think motivated reasoning is a driver for the polarization in the country? Because we assume that the things that we already believe are true. Those pockets just continue to get deeper and deeper on both sides.
I'm getting so excited. Yes. In addition to motivated reasoning, another source of the conflict is that all humans have, to some extent, more than others, but everyone has a tendency for a particular bias, and I forget, people might call it different things. I forget if it's called confirmation bias or something else, but I'll just say what it is. The bias to easily want to reject new evidence that disagrees with our prior beliefs and accept new evidence that agrees with our prior beliefs. So you see this in politics all the time. We have a two-party system here in the U.S., and people are generally going to adopt beliefs that agree with their existing political stance. And you especially see a great example of this is look at impeachments throughout the history of our country. And this would be true of any country, because countries are populated with humans. Impeachments, by and large, the vote is almost entirely upon party lines. Not exactly. Sometimes people go across party lines, but it's mostly along party lines. And think about this: impeachments are based on supposed, wrongdoings. Mm-hmm. Even I'm not a political scientist, so I don't know the details, but my understanding is, and it's not necessarily criminal offenses, but they're impeachable offenses, supposedly, according to the accusers. And the defenders rarely think they're defensible or justifiable charges. But think about it. Those charges have essentially nothing to do with the political platform. They have to do with some charges of wrongdoing. So how is it possible that the vote would be along such party lines? You should be able to give someone a vignette of these are the charges, and you could objectively look at it. And I guarantee you, and they've done studies on this, if you mask both the political party of the accused, that's all you have to do. If you mask that, then regardless of the party of the person assessing the charges, you would get it would go across party lines much more so. So,
yeah, it's almost purely motivated reasoning at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, interesting. So do you think that's the fundamental driver of polarization, or is there more to it than that? I mean, what puts us in the state that we're in at this point across society?
Again, because I'm not a political scientist, I can't judge, are we really that more politically divided now than historically, or is it
fabricated to make it look that way?
Or not even fabricated. Sometimes things seem like they're the worst now, but
what would make them seem that way? Just because things are louder these days, or it's just in front of us right now?
Well, I mean, just that we weren't alive
Okay. We just don't know the difference.
So we don't know the difference.
So this is just maybe the most insane part of the time in which we've been alive.
Right. So we don't remember. We can't. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, this is one of the most politically divided times. I think motivated reasoning is one, and particularly if you begin to really hate a candidate for some reason. Well, here's another great example of the bias. I guarantee you, and this might shock some people, but it's very obvious to behavioral scientists. I guarantee you that as much as most Democrats hate Donald Trump, and as much as most Republicans hated and still hate both Bill and Hillary Clinton, and both sides think that other candidate or that other person is
criminal,
corrupt and criminal to the bone and immoral. As much as they hate them, I guarantee you that if the exact circumstances were exactly the same, but the parties were switched for Trump and Clinton's, the feeling would be approximately reverse. Most Republicans would love the Clintons, and most but slightly less Democrats would love Donald Trump. I say slightly less.
What do you think is responsible for determining what path people choose at that point? At some point, there's an inflection point where somebody chooses their team. And if the team itself is the determinant of your opinions on the rest of what happens within your team, how's the team chosen in the first place? I'm just curious how that would happen.
That I don't know. I think you're asking why people get aligned to teams or parties in the first place. I don't know.
Tribalism, but
tribalism, and then also people come into certain beliefs, how they're raised, what their thinking is at the time that they start to form affiliations. It's partly influenced by, greatly influenced by what our parents believed or what party they're in. I mean, there's obviously many examples of children that switch parties from their parents, but that's one influence. So somehow we gravitate. I'm not sure.
Okay. I've been curious since we started talking about motivated reasoning and these different shortcuts that the brain takes. Do you think that these shortcuts, since there's a great understanding of psychology, I'm sure that it's leveraged at the highest levels. Do you think that those weaknesses in the human brain are exploited on both parties to control the outcome of their support? Like look at some of the campaign messaging from both sides during this election. The amount of slander and the ability for both sides to just confidently lie about the other side is incredible to me. But it has to be deliberate. And I wonder if there's somebody that's smarter than me, somebody like you, behind the scenes, quantifying what message could be sent out and in what way to get the best results for that party. So propaganda.
For sure, since at least the 1960s, advertisers and marketers, especially at the big companies, have been using scientific knowledge from the field of psychology on how to influence people. I assume, that's the same for political teams at the highest levels, particularly where they have the money to pay the experts to help them with this. So for sure, and if they're not, they probably should, because that's their goal, is to win.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that I don't particularly like two-party system.
I'm learning to not like it.
Well, what I don't like is it feels very odd to me that, if you look at companies or any organization, whether it's a nonprofit, academia, for-profits, we don't typically make people divide up into two teams and then fight to win certain platforms, and the goal is just that team winning. It tends to be a little more aligned with the company goals, and people might have different beliefs, and that's good. They collide with their beliefs and their talents and their diversity, and they produce some goals for the company. But so And then all this campaigning, and there's a lot of wasted time campaigning. Also, when we hire people for jobs, we don't have them campaign, we have them interview. We tend to learn more about them through the interview process, I think, than typical political campaigning. It's a weird dilemma. In defense of the political teams, I took a campaign training seminar because I was interested in politics and running for office. But then I got more interested in social entrepreneurism, particularly with homeless housing, and we could talk about that sometime. But it was a fantastic seminar, and the political consultant that ran it, he pointed out there's a rule. It's called 84 or 86%. Let's just call it 86%. The 86% rule is that essentially, they've discovered that only around 86% of the population either understands the issues or cares about the issues. So then obviously the campaign has to pick out, sound bites, very brief, it's a marketing.
Yeah, at this point, it's a dopamine response game.
Right.
Like, it's not about sharing fact. And it worries me because are there any educated voters at this point when all of the information that we're using to make our decisions is fabricated by another party?
Yeah.
86% of people are, you're saying, educated voters?
Yes. No, 86% are uneducated voters.
Oh.
They're smart people. And by the way, liberals and conservatives can stop accusing each other of each side being unintelligent, because that's the other thing they have in common. On average, the IQ of liberals and conservatives is approximately similar. Now, there's subgroups of people where if you define people a certain way, along certain beliefs and things, you could identify certain subgroups that have lower intelligence, but in general, on average. So each side is not stupid. They just have different beliefs.
You said 86% of people are uneducated voters. Yeah. Well, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. That probably sounds spot on because, the majority of the information is garbage anyway. So if the majority of people who are receiving the majority of information is garbage, the majority of people are going to be uneducated voters.
Right, and we should be careful about the word educated. What I mean is they're intelligent.
Yeah, but they just don't understand what they're voting on, right?
And they may have high formal education. Some of them may be college educated, but they're not educated on the political issues. So they either don't understand the political issues or they don't care. So only 14%.
And then those people are going to be a single issue voter. Something's going to appeal to them on one of the parties, and that'll be a down ballot vote.
They could be. That's why I'm intrigued. Again, I'm careful to say what I'm an expert and what I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on political science, but I am intrigued that some of the European countries have these multi-party systems, which apparently one of the impacts of that is that you could really align with whatever party that you feel you have this niche alignment with. And then because there's so many parties, they have to build coalitions. So you end up having a governing body that has more of a coalition. Now, you could have other experts that could better inform us of the pros and cons of that. But it must be hard to create governments because we suppose to have one of the best systems in the world, but it's extremely dysfunctional. Part of that is a great article by a lawyer and a business person who looked at this and said, and it's probably going to sound obvious when you hear this, but they said, well, look, the reason why customer satisfaction in politics is so low, citizen satisfaction, compared to any other industry, is because essentially the citizen's not really the customer anymore. Maybe they were
in the initial phase of the government,
or something. But now, it's more special interest groups, money,
donors,
and I'm in donors, and I'm not a huge criticizer of lobbyists in the sense that lobbyists. I've known some very good lobbyists. That Bob Kraft, who is a retired senior lobbyist at Farm Bureau here in Indianapolis, amazing guy with great integrity. And his job was to educate both political parties about the needs of farmers, et cetera. So lobbyists do serve an important role. They can be experts in an area. But the point is that it's not the citizen, it's donors and other special interest groups that are really the customer.
To your point about how it must be hard to create a government, isn't it interesting the cyclical nature of human beings and civilizations rising and falling? They never last. They always end up decaying at some point in time. It's like, you remember that statement, I forget who made it famous, but it says, weak men create bad times create strong men create good times create weak men. That cyclical effect. I wonder if that happens over the course of a civilization as well. I wonder if that's a driving factor. We've had so many good times, everybody got lazy and comfortable and content with what they had, and now we begin to fall apart.
It could be. You told me that phrase before, and I love that. I think, Ray Dalio has some nice YouTube videos about the rise and falls of countries and
The Changing World Order, I believe, is the name of that video, and I've seen it. It's fantastic.
Yes, and I'm not an expert in it, but some of the cornerstone of that has something to do with that. These the most powerful countries also have the financial centers. They're powerful. Their power includes being financially powerful, and part of what happens is they print too much money, inflation and things, and then their currency no longer becomes the currency.
We're on our way there, aren't
we?
The world.
Did
you see the first day of the fiscal year this year? We hit a record for the most debt ever taken in one day. We went up by $280 billion in one day or something like that. It's insane.
So China, starting a few years ago, started to approach, in some ways surpass us in some metrics, some economic metrics. We're still ahead of them in many ways, and having a democracy is helpful. But just in terms of understanding China and U.S. alone, everyone should read the book that Elon Musk recommended. I'm blanking on the name of it. We can put it in your notes. It's a fantastic book for understanding the U.S. and China. And so that book was about how, if you look at, there's not many examples, around 20 examples, but I think 12 out of the 20 examples will end in war when a rising power has this conflict with an existing power. But there's a chance to prevent it. And anyone that wants to prevent a war between U.S. and China should read that book. There's a lot of good ideas in there about how to prevent the war. Something you said about news and facts. So I agree with you. Both political parties want the truth. Both parties have a hard time knowing where to find the truth. Now, obviously, if we search for it, I personally feel it's easier to find the truth in written form, because you can Google anywhere what's the most...
Because the algorithm's not trying to appease your pre-existing... Because that's what the algorithm is trying to do. It's trying to give you what you want to see or what it thinks you want to see. So it's going to reinforce... It's like another layer of the cognitive bias we've already discussed.
There's going to be not only what you want, but perhaps geared more toward the negative. I'm not an expert in that area, but yeah, there's a lot of problems with that. And there's some people trying to see if they can remake, a clickable media in sort of more,
neutral way.
Neutral way, in a way that's healthier for people.
Yeah.
But you also turned me on to the fact that Elon Musk's what is it?
Community notes. So it's the elimination of a group of people with their own biases controlling the moderation on the platform. Instead, it's replaced by a group of people that typically disagree. They have to agree in order to moderate, take down, or suppress any of the things on X, which is really cool. So you have to force two sides that typically disagree to agree, and that's a good indication that this is truly wrong and incorrect.
It's fantastic because you see one of my centrist flavors is I'm, in full disclosure, I'm a lifelong voting Democrat, but I'm only slightly left-leaning. I think of myself as a centrist, and in many issues I align with conservatives. One of them is, I'm a big fan of free speech.
Yeah.
Now, people have...
Which was historically a Democrat position.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
But the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
And if you have reasonable conversations usually in person, instead of people at a distance easily criticizing on social media, people can usually, even if they're extremely liberal and conservative, come up with some common sense discussions about free speech and about, because there's still the examples or cases that, one of the principles where free speech is not a good idea is if it's promoting immediate danger and harm. I mean, if you just look, I don't know if it depends locally or if it's nationally, but in general, it's a crime. Ask the police department. It's a crime to do something that promotes
and to encourage violence,
to
encourage a crime.
Violence.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone else told me who lived in I forget if it was Colorado or North Carolina, Montana or something. They said, they believe in free speech there, but they also believe in taking responsibility for it. So there's a balance. Mm-hmm. So it's a difficult issue. So I think both sides have stopped blaming each other so much on this issue, and also even the social media people. Republicans have been traditionally against supportive of businesses. They're against some of the social media now, but primarily because they feel that some of them, like Google and Amazon things, are supportive of the left. That's the only reason they're against it.
It is incredible on both sides of the spectrum how the party's ideas on things will change for their own benefit at any given time.
Yes.
Like, so you didn't really believe that, you were just saying that, but now it doesn't benefit you anymore, so you've changed your mind.
Right.
Yeah, that happens all the time too.
But they're in a difficult position. Yes, they're rich and they're making a lot of money, Facebook and Google, but it's a difficult thing.
Yeah.
You ask anyone to take over to solve that issue, that's a difficult issue because you want to allow free speech, but you also don't want to allow fake news to hurt people. Mm-hmm. But I do think I like Musk's solution of allowing free speech but adding the community notes. So that's a very creative idea.
Yeah. I think it's honestly at this point in time the best moderation idea ever, the most fair at least. Mm-hmm. It's not perfect, and I don't know that there is a way to make a perfect moderation tool because there's so much subjective that goes into that. But I think this is a great start, and this is way more effort than any of the other legacy social media platforms have ever tried to put into it.
Mainstream cable news has wonderful production values. It's fun to watch. But since that change in the rules in the 70s with communication, where they're allowed to be so biased, if you look at, for example, CNN, MSNBC, they're so, almost all the anchors are very biased to the left, except I really like Fareed Zakaria. He's so knowledgeable and very balanced. His GPS program on the weekend is amazing. On the right, Fox News, almost all their anchors are so biased to the right, except Brett Baer and Martha McCallum are pretty balanced. And both Brett Baer and Fareed Zakaria are very knowledgeable about the issues. And there's other anchors that are biased but knowledgeable, but they let their bias get in the way. So what type of bias am I talking about? I'm not saying that liberals, that for any given issue, that liberals and conservatives are always wrong and the centrist position is always right. You could come up with any particular issue and liberals could have a stance, conservatives have a stance, and centrists have a stance. And on any particular issue, maybe the liberals are more correct, maybe the conservatives are more correct, maybe the centrist is, maybe a blend is more correct. I don't know. But my point is, the bias I'm talking about in terms of the skill and duty of the news anchor is bias, and also their producers, is bias in the selection of facts and bias in interpretation of the facts and bias in
omission of facts.
Omission of facts and the skill with which you ask follow-up questions to your guests. So most of the anchors on those stations are very biased, and they make big mistakes in those biases. But we're seeing some change where there are some streaming news stations that are less.
You can catch me watching congressional hearings live. You can catch me reading the bills before they're signed into law or after they're signed into law. I go to the most fundamental truths I can possibly find. I don't listen to what Fox News or CNN said this politician said. I go and listen to their interview. I listen to them say it.
Great.
I follow them on X. I follow both sides on X. I follow Kamala Harris. I follow Trump. I follow everybody. And I literally just look from the most fundamental source. I don't want to hear somebody else that tell me it because I know it's coming with some degree of bias every single time. So, yeah.
I'm listening.
And then I just find myself pissed off. So it's better to just for me, it's better just to see the most fundamental source of the truth. It is a bit nerdy, but I love watching congressional hearings. I love watching them debate things out and hearing everybody's sides in the actual room where it matters. I wish more people would do that, but the problem is it's not sexy at all. It's not fun. There's no entertainment value. Like you said, the mainstream media is flashy. It's exciting. They always, make everything an emergency. They make everything sound like a superlative. Everything's the most crazy it's ever been, whatever, which I think also contributes to the polarization because mainstream media has to continue to up their entertainment value to keep their viewership and whatnot. But I wish more people would actually pay attention to what's actually going on instead of hearing it from somebody else with their spin.
I think that's great. You encourage me. I want to start doing that more. You're right. When there's impeachment hearings, for example, I will tend to watch the entire thing, and you get so much more information than if you just hear the news sound bites because they take things out of context. There's some encouraging, there's different, several countries are starting to train children in how to detect fake news.
That's terrifying to me. Because now the person training them, how do they not have a bias? Are they training them in a neutral way? Or are they just pre-programming these people to have a certain set of beliefs and to reject this person that's training's, what they don't believe? It scares me.
I don't know that answer, but I hope they're training him in a neutral way because certainly there's examples on both sides of news that is either fake or biased. The other thing, too, is I really hope that humanity, through wonderful podcasts such as yours, starts to learn some more about these cognitive biases that can help arm ourselves when we look at candidates and go through life.
To understand why we think the way we think and why other people think the way they think.
Yes. And also, a great example. Here's another fascinating fact from behavior science. There is literally a zero correlation between confidence and competence, and between confidence and whether someone's telling the truth. They've done many studies on this. So
that's a bit terrifying, isn't it?
It is. But it's useful to know. And even though I know this fact, I still have to fight to guard myself against it because it's not just in politics. Vendors. There's a lot of vendors or contractors who will tell you, oh, I've been doing this for years. I know how to do this. And they seem very confident. We have to remember, confidence only tells you one thing. It tells you whether they're confident. And confidence can be a useful skill. It's helpful for, sales and self-promotion. And just because someone's confident doesn't mean they're incompetent. I'm just saying it means that confidence is an irrelevant piece of information when judging whether that person knows what they're talking about, whether they're good at what they do, and whether they're lying or telling the truth.
What can conservatives learn from liberals? Is there a number one thing?
Number one, what we've touched upon, that they have more in common than differences. They're human, they're prone to some of these biases. But then also knowing what their strengths are and their strengths are that from a personality standpoint, there's 5 major areas of personality. They're called the Big Five, or 5-factor model. The acronym is OCEAN. O is for openness to new experiences. C is for conscientiousness. E is for extroversion versus introversion. A is for agreeableness versus non-agreeableness. N is for neuroticism or emotional stability, so as not to stigmatize, because all these can be strengths or weaknesses depending on the situation. I like to call the N, instead of neuroticism or emotional stability, I tend to call it, emotional calmness versus emotional reactivity. Among those 5 areas, the main difference between liberals and conservatives, and again, it's only on average, and it's relatively small differences compared to their similarities, is that on average, conservatives are slightly more conscientious. Now, what does conscientious mean from the psychology, behavior science standpoint? It means it's best described if you think about some of the subfacets. So it includes things like dependability, planning ahead, a sense of duty and obligation, cautiousness, achievement striving. Achievement striving is, do you get a great sense of satisfaction from accomplishing things? I'm moderately conscientious because I'm actually very, very low on planning ahead or a sense of orderliness. But I'm very high on a sense of duty and obligation and achievement striving. So, on the other hand, liberals tend to be, on average, slightly more open to new experiences. So they're going to be more open-minded to trying new things. They're also, related to that, is more of a tendency to keep exploring options, including information about debates, whereas the opposite of that is a little being more traditional and being more likely to want what's called cognitive closure. So conservatives on average would be a little bit more likely to want to come to some closure on a debate, disagreement, without needing to consider further information. And it's not an intelligence thing. Again, on average, both sides have similar intelligence. So first thing they should learn about their differences, it's the same thing when I give, because I've become an expert in personality assessment. In fact, I created a modified version of the 5-factor model for the work setting called CareScan. And as you know, it's being used in the MyShift company, which acts like a Uber technology to connect caregivers and care seekers. But CareScan has a proprietary algorithm for different job positions, including for caregivers, but it could be used for other industries and other jobs.
Like dating apps?
Dating apps that we want to build a new one. When people understand each other's personality, they understand what the right fit is for the job. So whether I'm running an academic project or a business enterprise, if I want an operations person, for the lead project manager, they absolutely need to be high in the conscientious area. So in general, if I didn't know anything about an applicant other than that they're a conservative or a liberal, and I had to make the choice for chief operations officer or chief executive officer, then I would choose the conservative for operations and the liberal for executive officer, or for the liberal for anything, including CEO, but anything involving needing to explore, innovate new ideas, new options. Just because on average, they differ in those two areas. Conservatives, on average, are going to be better at operations because on average, they're more conscientious, they plan ahead, more dependable, slightly more than liberals. And liberals, on average, are going to be more open-minded, more likely to explore new ideas and new alternatives than conservatives, slightly on average. Any given liberal could be better than a conservative on operations, and any given conservative could be better than a liberal on inventions. These are just on average across the groups of people. So that's the first thing, is to understand that they're more similar than different, and where they are different, these are some of the ways they're different. But the most important thing is that they're so similar on their biases. If they just understand that both sides are on average equally intelligent, and both sides are on average morally similar, they want good things for the country. They just have different beliefs. For example, I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fan. I finally started to practice consistently 2 days a week the last 5 years. Before that, I had only dabbled. But, Dana White, president of the UFC, I agree with something he said. He said he thinks it's ridiculous that people would reject each other as friends just because they have different beliefs. It's crazy.
Yeah, there is no such thing as an amicable disagreement anymore. I mean, and it's to the point where people will, ditch their friends and family of years because of some stupid thought they hold,
And what I'm about to say is not verified through research, but I could Google and find out. It's been my impression that when it comes to this issue about friendship and disagreement, I feel like the conservatives are a little bit more aligned with my belief on that we shouldn't reject friends just because we disagree. In my opinion, I've seen more liberals reject someone just because they voted for Trump. Whereas, because they feel so strongly about it. Now, I don't know whether any of my conservative friends rejected people because they voted for Clintons, but I don't think that occurred as much. But I could be wrong.
Well, my anecdotal experience is the exact same as that. I've had the scenario happen in my friend group a few times. So it's very strange. Some of the most conservative friends that I have do not carry judgment across to their liberal counterparts.
Yeah.
But in the reverse, it seems more like we've lost some friends and have some more disagreements that way, which it's not a bad thing, I guess. It is overall. I wish everybody could have amicable disagreements. We don't have to agree to be friends. And we can understand that there's a reason why the other person thinks and believes the way that they do. Right. And that's just as valid as the way that you think that you do. Like, that's what another thing people don't understand, like the confidence that they have in their own beliefs. That's the same level of confidence the other person that disagrees with you has in their own beliefs. The realities are the same. People rely on their own idea of their moral superiority, or that they've somehow thought through the situation better, have access to more information, or just smarter than the next person. It's kind of funny.
And it's also a misunderstanding. The people that have so much hatred towards someone just because of their beliefs, they're assuming that the other person is sort of acting immorally. In other words, I would say this to my conservative friends if Clintons were in the office now. But since it was so recent that Trump was and he's running again, I'll say this to my liberal friends. It's so common for liberals to assume that anyone who votes for Trump is either stupid, which they're not. About half the country is voting for Trump instead of Kamala. So half the country is not stupid. So it's not an intelligence issue. On average, Kamala's supporters have similar intelligence to Trump's supporters. Liberals will also assume people voting for Trump are immoral because they knowingly, both the voters and the Republican politicians, are knowingly voting for someone who's immoral and who is a con artist. But what they need to understand is that most of the people voting for Trump don't believe that he's a con artist. Most of them believe that he does want to make America great. I would say a large percentage of them do agree and understand that he has a dysfunctional ego that gets in his own way. You can get most conservatives most conservatives agree with that. Mm-hmm. And most conservatives say there's a lot of things they don't like about him, about how he handles things, just different things he says, and his dysfunctional ego. But those Trump supporters believe that he's being unfairly painted by the liberal media. And the conservatives are correct that mainstream left-leaning news is biased to the left. Most of the anchors are CNN, MSNBC. And the liberals are correct that most of the anchors on Fox News are biased to the right. So no one knows where to get accurate news or unbiased news on mainstream network news. You can get it elsewhere from printed news, and there's emerging sources on mainstream network news. So that's what they have to understand. Their opposing voters are not stupid. They're not immoral. They just believe things differently than you, and you can believe that they're mistaken. There's a lot of things I think people are mistaken about their beliefs, but they're not immoral, and they're not stupid. You can say that, well, you can believe that some people have been hoodwinked. You can believe that a candidate really is a con artist and they've hoodwinked people, but you can still make a decision, or you can still try to understand why the other person voted. And then there's some people that just from practical standpoint, like if you want to learn about Elon Musk, Walter Isaacson, as usual, wrote an amazing biography. His biography of Elon Musk tells you everything you need to know about Elon. My Goodreads review, I think, is a fantastic review of the book. I think, well, I won't go. I'll just say what I think about Elon. He's our modern day Iron Man. He's a genius. He has weaknesses like everyone does. One of them, he's prone to believe in conspiracy theories, and he has some emotional immaturity and will outlash at people just because they disagree with him, particularly if they're not as much in a power position. If they are more power, then he'll control a little bit more. Other than that, he's amazing. But it's in the book. It's clear in that when Trump was president, Elon told people that it was clear several times that Elon believed that Donald Trump was a con artist. But now he's supporting Trump, and he has his reasons. He believes from a practical standpoint that no one's perfect, and that when I doubt that he's changed his mind, that he's a con artist, but he probably believes that, or maybe he's changed his mind, I don't know. We should let him answer that. But the point is, he now believes that Elon has more strengths than weaknesses in terms of the impact on the country. He thinks the country would be better off with Elon than with Kamala. And that's true for a lot of people on either side of the issue, on either side of the candidate, knows the candidates are not perfect, but sometimes they make a decision based on practical matters. And that disgusts many people because the other side will say, well, it's immoral because you should vote for someone that has integrity. They have to have integrity first. But the other side will say, well... No,
the other side will always find their arguments for why the other side's also doesn't have integrity.
Exactly. So
honestly, like you're saying, those complaints are actually valid. So it's a choosing of I don't know. I don't know how that's rationalized. Everybody probably rationalizes that a little bit differently.
Yeah.
It is honestly just a little bit depressing to me that, you know, the options that we've had in the last few presidential cycles are who we have to choose from to lead the free world. It's insane. Like, why are we not putting our best forward? And I understand there's this whole system that's built now, and it's pretty much impossible for these people to get, you know, for decent people to be put into these positions of power because of the way that everything's controlled through money and through lobbying and through special interests and through mega PACs and donors and mainstream media suppressing other, you know, people that could be on the come up and just, you know, on and on and on and on and on. It's nearly impossible to be put into the presidency. So Trump is actually kind of an anomaly with that respect. So that's kind of a neat thing. And I think that's one of the pillars that people sort of aligned with in his first round for presidency. He was like the outsider. He wasn't part of the political class, wasn't part of the system of people, you know.
I think the other thing people liked about Trump is that he's unscripted. Mm-hmm. As far as outsiders, I don't have a strong feeling about whether someone should be an outsider or not. I'm a huge fan of expertise. Mm-hmm. So if someone's been in office a long time and they've learned a lot of expert knowledge that can help them navigate government better, I'm fine with that. But my biggest beef is what you said about, you know, the candidates. To me, there's no clearer example or manifestation that we have a broken political system than to look at the quality of our presidential candidates, especially when it was Biden and Trump. But now even with Kamala, you know, I don't want to get into this podcast about, you know, specifics. But having said that, still, if you look at both of them, how really, I mean, would either side, what percentage of people would say that Trump and Kamala are the best candidates we could come up with for either side? There's very low percentage.
Nobody's excited for either of these people, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but yet somehow these are our only two options to choose from.
Right. So, how is this possible? So, we need a way to attract better candidates, and that's why I don't know the answer. But to me, I always think about other organizations. So, any business, people don't campaign for their position; we recruit them. So, I would prefer if each side could create a committee and just recruit their best candidate. Now,
do you think that the idea, though, for these parties and putting the people up that they put up is that they're trying to appeal to emotions because that's what gets the public's interest? It's not. I don't know that the public would be as interested in having just extremely intelligent, rational people, you know, being put up for office because there's nothing exciting about that. So then how do you get voters to come out?
That's the other issue.
And if you don't get the voters to come out for your presidential election, everybody below that in your party is also not getting votes. So
that's the other issue because there have been candidates on both parties that I would say, you know, are pretty good candidates in terms of being intelligent, having good integrity, having good grasp of the, you know, good knowledge about the issues, either with a political experience or with a business experience. And I won't go into names or details.
We probably agree. We probably have the same names in our heads right now, to be honest.
But they weren't appealing for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. Either they didn't have a lot of backing or their personality. So that's the other issue too, is sometimes as citizens we don't vote for the right reason. We might unconsciously vote for someone because they're taller or because of the sound of their voice or because of personality issues that they just might seem more likable. Likability plays some role in the job because you want a politician to be likable so they can influence people. But it's not the most important part of the job. The most important is, are they competent in what they do? And so the problem is the whole campaigning process is really the process, and the voting process is really emphasizing too much of the wrong issues and not enough of the right issues. I don't know what the solution is. There's something called thin slicing, where we make decisions quickly based on limited information. That thin slicing process only works well if you're an expert, because you've amassed all this expertise, and then you can make this quick decision. It works terrible if you're not an expert, or if there's these situations you're prone to bias. When I would argue with one of my Facebook friends, who was a really smart guy, conservative, interestingly, eventually I could change his belief on a couple issues, because we would debate. He would send me things and I would say, well, no matter what I say, you're not willing to change, but I'm willing to change my belief. And I would argue with him about different things. But one of the keys to arguing, this is very important. Here's a call to action. If you want to influence someone, and Stephen Covey talks about this in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where one of the habits is, it's around the second or third habit, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And he points out, to be influenced, you have to be influenceable in a right way. Not influenceable like leaning in the wind, changing your mind just to be passive, but I mean changing your mind based on the facts. If you're presented with new facts that should change your mind, then you should change your mind. Don't prevent yourself from changing your mind in the right way just because of your ego. But one of the best ways to try to influence someone is to show appropriate level of allowing yourself to be influenced in a right way based on new evidence by understanding them. Like, if I want to influence someone, the very first thing I do is I try to understand what their point is, and then I let them know where I agree with them. People love that.
It lets the guard come down a little bit too.
Yeah, and it lets them know that you're attempting to understand them. It then puts on the table, it starts to build on the table the areas you agree with, and then you can get into disagreements. I think it was Ben Shapiro, who I think was quoting someone else as well, says something like, he values more clarity than agreement. So there's nothing wrong with disagreement. Disagreement is great. But the way disagreement happens a lot in social media is not very productive, and even on mainstream news. If you have more thoughtful, I'm a big, Noah Trevor. I've seen him, he's a very thoughtful person in addition to being a talented comedian, but I've seen him interview, it was I think a Republican, I forget which one, whether it was Ben Crenshaw or someone else. But very intelligent conversation they had. And instead of slinging arrows against each other, they both came from sort of a centrist perspective, but importantly, they talked about things intelligently, and they recognized where the other one was correct. When people are campaigning, they're just criticizing on these sound bites. But when you get people together and they actually have intelligent conversation, you see they agree on a lot of the things. And the important point is not the agreement. The important point is the productivity and efficiency is much better in terms of the relationship and trying to solve problems if you can clarify where you agree and disagree with civility, and it's just helpful to understand the person, so you see let them know what you agree with, and then let them know how you disagree.
It's having a genuine attempt at understanding the person sitting across from you.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. I think that's something we're definitely missing out on at this current time. So, and I think that, a lot of the stuff is coming from the top down, but a lot of things can be fixed from the bottom up, from the everyday citizens. The attempt to agree or the attempt to understand the next person would go a long way. And that could force change higher up the chain in our political system. Yeah. Maybe there's really interesting stuff. And I hope that this podcast, the people that view it will take away some of the things that we've talked about. I think everything we've talked about is incredible, from cognitive bias to, the attempt to understanding the next person to, us all having the similarity of being human beings at the end of the day, and us all being on the same team at the end of the day. Is there anything else that you would want to leave the viewers with on that topic?
No, I think
those are the fundamentals.
Those are the fundamentals. Understanding that we all reason based on emotions and not just logic, and just
we're all humans at the end of the day.
Right.
We all have the brains that will take shortcuts.
Right.
So.
And on average, both parties are equally intelligent on average. And along those lines, there's much more variability within any party than between, or any group, than between, on average, between groups. That's why it's so silly, white supremacy is so silly and illogical, besides being immoral, but because if you look at some of the people who believe in white supremacy, it's clear that they have less skills in a variety of areas than the average non-white person that they feel they're superior to. Virtually any skill you can think of, physical, mental, emotional, there's so much variability between people within any group, within any race, ethnicity, political party, than there is on average between those groups. So that's an encouraging message for both sides of the party. But I think for leaving on a last message, I think you said it well. I think your point was a good point to end on, which is kind of some optimism and hope that as citizens, as we educate ourselves with less biased news and take it upon ourselves to try to change the system, maybe we can make things better.
Starts with us.
Yes, it does.
All righty. Well, awesome, Patrick. This has been fun.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I want to be the greatest. Everybody on the face.